How do you feel about silence? So I was thinking about this interview today and over the weekend. And as a kid, I'm sure this is going to shock you. I was pretty chatty. And so I had a lot of like, silence is golden, like make sure you pause. And then as an educator, we had training on how long to pause, what we should do in that silent space, and even as a speaker really leaning into the power of the pause to let people have the silence to understand that. And yet my friend Scott, who is our guest today, has written an entire book about how silence can kill your career and how silence can be really detrimental to our relationships, the way we work. And so I'm kind of curious, if you are here live, what you think about silence. Are you like totally fine with silence? Does silence make you uncomfortable? Did you hear that silence is golden and you need to stop talking more? Or is it just me? It cannot just be me, because I know I've said it to other people, but and it's a skill that I've had to learn. However, I really am excited for you to meet Scott today. He is a former police officer and law enforcement official. He is a former FBI trained negotiator. I guess he's still an FBI trained negotiator who is a speaker and a coach and author and just an all around really great guy. I had to like pause our conversation so we could get on this podcast today because we wanted to keep talking. He's just amazing. So I'm so excited for Scott to join us here today. Hello.
Hello, Jen. How are you?
I'm good. So welcome. So glad that you're here.
Thank you. Excited to be here and share with your audience.
Yes. I am really excited about this conversation. I was thinking about it a lot this weekend. I actually went on a really long walk and was kind of like pondering some stuff. And so I'm just excited to hear from you and your wisdom. So as we start, I always love for people to just kind of know who you are. Give us a little insight into who you are, how you, this little storied career that it's not little, but like this path that it doesn't seem so linear. Tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Yeah, it's, in a nutshell, I live in central Kentucky, so right outside of Lexington, Kentucky. Been married 27 years, two grown daughters, 23 and 19. New empty nesters, which we're huge fans of. You and I have talked a lot about that, best kept secret in parenting. But more importantly to this conversation is I spent 20 years in law enforcement. And in that time in law enforcement, I wore a lot of different hats. One of the hats that I got into very early on in my career is I became an FBI trained hostage negotiator. So all of my training and negotiations came through the FBI, through their academies and things like that. And so I did that for most of my career. And I also did the public information officer duties. So I talked to the media, I did media releases, television interviews, all of that stuff all of the time. And was teaching DARE, and it just dawned on me towards the second half of my career, I guess, that I was really communicating for a living. I was wearing a police uniform while I did it, but I was communicating on the phone with the hostage taker, with the media, with my DARE students, with the officers I supervised. I was just communicating for a living. And so around 2010-ish, I had about 8 years left until I could retire under a 20-year retirement. I had a friend who was organizing a conference, and she said, listen, one of my speakers backed out. Do you have anything you can talk about? This was like 2 months ahead. It's like, well, I've been researching bullying because my DARE students were talking a lot about it. I wanted to find some research to give them information that could help them. And she said, listen, if you'll speak on bullying in this breakout session, we'd love to have you. So I did that. In that session, the administrators, school resource officers that were in there afterwards said, hey, would you come train our staff? I was like, yeah, you'll have to pay for my gas. Like, I didn't know how this worked, right? You'll have maybe feed me a meal or something. Like, I'm new to this, but I'm like, sure. So I went and trained their staff, and then their staff was like, would you come back and train our students? So that started a speaking career for me that I kind of envisioned as a middle school guy sitting in a school assembly, seeing somebody on the stage sharing. And I'm like, what a great job that would be. And my wife is like, everybody thinks that's a great job. She goes, very few people do it. And I said, well, the cool thing for me is I got 20 years of stories that I now use to teach people important concepts, most of them around communication. My school assemblies are social media and technology communication, how not to blow up your life as a teenager with that stuff. And then in corporate America, it's corporate communication, both internally and externally, uh,
Hmm.
how our silence can cause us a lot of issues, which is how I ended up here with you and your audience today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing all of that. I always love a story. One, because it helps us connect. I really genuinely believe that we need to connect as human beings. Like
Yes.
that is the way forward. It has always been the best way, but it just becomes more and more crucial every day. But I think it also helps people see, a lot of the people who are listening are in careers in corporate America. Some of them are entrepreneurs and business owners.
Mhm.
But that idea of the retrospective of my life has a thread. And when I'm doing coaching clients, as my individual clients, we talk, and they're in transition, we talk about what's the golden thread. And that
Mm.
revelation for you is, oh, I'm communicating for a living.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. And for me, it's always been about I'm helping people learn and get along better. When I was a
Mhm.
music teacher, when I was a school administrator and a school leader, like that's what I do. And so I just really appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah.
And you mentioned at the end this idea of how silence is a problem.
Yeah.
So how did you, as I kind of shared earlier, some
Right.
people want me to be more silent. Sometimes I want me to be more silent sometimes. And there is power in certain kinds of silence. So
Yes.
help us understand this kind of silence you're talking about, because I think it's really important.
Yeah. So I say all the time, as a negotiator, there were times I was silent
Mhm.
because silence can be used in the short term as a tactic. It can't be
Yeah.
our default. Like it can't be the thing that we go to because we don't know what else to do, right? It has to be a short term tactic for a purpose. If I was negotiating with somebody after a couple of hours on the phone, I might become silent just to see if they break the silence. And if they do by checking on me or something like that, like I know I've now established rapport. That's useful for
Mhm.
me as a negotiator. So they knew my silence was out of character because I didn't start the call with silence. Like that's not a productive way to start a conversation with silence. It feels judgy. It feels like I'm being attacked. I get defensive when people are silent for too long because I'm replaying what should I have said, what did I say, all that stuff. So I
Sure.
tell organizations all the time in our cancel culture world, my issue is a lot of times our silence is because we're so afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm so afraid that what I say is going to offend that I end up saying nothing. And what I teach organizations across the country, what I wrote about in my book is silence without rapport feels like we don't care.
Yeah.
Now, rapport is
Mm.
the secret sauce. Rapport is why my wife and I can spend hours in the car on a road trip, neither one of us saying much of anything, and the other one not worried that their spouse is mad. Because we have thousands of hours of communication that supports that level of silence. But when we have an issue internally or externally, and we shut down communication, we don't kill the story. We just lose control of it.
Mm.
Because if it's an internal issue, our team members are talking, they know something's up. Their spidey sense is tingling. And when management is not discussing it, it feels like they don't care. It feels like there's a
100%.
disconnect, like they don't care. And I will start polishing my resume and I will start looking for because something's brewing here and I don't know what it is and it
Yep.
doesn't feel safe.
Mhm.
If I'm a client or a customer and I know there's an issue with the product you sold me or the service you're selling me and no one's talking about it, I'll take my business elsewhere.
Yeah.
If there's a problem, if you just tell me, hey, we're aware of this, we're working on a solution. As soon as we have it, we'll let you know. I'm like, thank you. You
Mhm.
care, you're aware of it, and you're trying to fix it. Like that's what I need from you
Yeah.
as a customer or a client. If I'm on the team, maybe HR has said, don't talk about this. Listen, we know there's an issue. Let me know. Like we know there's an issue. We're working on it. We want this to be the best place to work ever. And in order to do that, we got to fix some things. At least then I know they're aware of it. They're working on a solution. I feel safer.
Yeah. There's so many good things about what you just said that I think every leader and every human needs to really latch onto. One is that it is the natural human reaction to silence to create a story.
Mhm.
Our brain doesn't want to live in that uncertainty. So to understand what's going on, to make sense of the world, we create a story. Our
Yes.
personalities are going to create a story, just our regular thought processes based on past experience. And the human negativity bias is
Mhm.
typically going to make that story negative. We have
Yes.
to work to assume the best. And when I'm working with leadership teams and we're talking about working through conflict or whatever, what at the end, I'm always like, make the next appointment in that last meeting, because otherwise it's super awkward to come back and they're going to create all these stories about, oh, they don't really want to talk to me. They were just saying that to be nice.
Right.
We make up all these stories. So that narrative piece is just normal human response. I mean,
Yes.
last week I sent a couple emails out to people and I didn't hear anything back. And then I also sent a Slack message in my coaching group to my coaches and I didn't hear anything back. And I was like, are people not listening to me? Like I've just had
Yeah.
like it's just a
Yeah.
normal thing for us as
Yeah.
humans. And the transparency piece that you talked about is so key. It's
Mhm.
just so important. So when you are helping people in this way and talking about silence can't be your default,
Right.
this idea of being afraid, I think, is really key. We're afraid to say the wrong thing. We're
Yes.
afraid to offend. How do you help people get around that fear? Because that's real. Like there
Yeah.
are potentials there, but our
Yes.
fear, I think, sometimes makes them bigger than they really are.
Yeah, there are hot button issues to be sure. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that, what I what I train organizations is we have decided as a culture there are things we don't talk about in polite society. And I hate that. Those are in broad categories, those are things like, mental health is one that we don't like to talk about it in a polite society. We don't like to talk about race relations in a polite society. We don't like to talk. And those are the things to me that need our attention the most.
Mhm.
Those are the things
Yeah.
that a conversation can make so much easier. When somebody comes back and they've had some kind of a mental health issue, you know what? Me too. Like I've been there, done that. It's horrible. If I can help you, please let me know. Because the more we talk about shared experiences, the more it makes it okay for us to have those experiences.
Yes.
And to me, COVID taught me that. Like during COVID, everybody shared all their symptoms all over the place. It was too much. Like I knew who was on the couch, what their fever was, whether or not they had diarrhea. Like it was too much.
Yes,
But at the
yes.
same time, when I got COVID, and we all did, I drew from all those experiences and I said, you know what? My experience is normal. And
Mhm.
those people made it through.
Yeah.
If we can have these conversations, we can normalize the experience and we can show people this is a season of discomfort that has an other side to it. Like you just
Yes.
got to keep pushing through.
Mhm.
I also tell people the more I claim or the more my brain makes something off limits, the more I will tap dance around it so as to not offend, which actually creates more of an awkward situation than
Yeah.
if I just said what I was thinking, telling somebody, calling them in, saying, I have to have this conversation with you. This could be awkward, but I think we'll both be better on the other side of it. If I say something wrong, please correct me.
Mhm.
Like you're giving them permission. You're saying, I want best for both of us.
Yes.
If I say the wrong thing out of ignorance, the loving thing you can do is correct me.
Yes.
And if you say the wrong thing out of ignorance, the most loving thing I can do is correct you.
Mhm.
We'll both be better once we push through the awkward.
Yeah.
Having raised teenagers, and you know this, Jen, their kryptonite is awkward, right? They're,
Yep.
they're
They're
so
gonna avoid it
afraid.
all day.
They're so afraid it's going to be awkward. And I've tried to tell my girls, when you bump against awkward,
Mhm.
that just tells you there's awesome on the other side. Like
Yep.
we have to push through the awkward to find the awesome. You will have awkward conversations with people on your team. And if you bump up against the awkward and leave, it'll be awkward for both of you.
Yep.
If you push through lovingly the awkward, you'll find the awesome on the other side. And we do business with people we like, know, and trust.
Yes.
The only way I can like, know, and trust you is if we can have a real conversation.
Yeah, because I say this all the time when I'm teaching, but I talk about it in my TEDx, is that all real relationships have conflict. All real
Yep.
relationships have awkward moments. That means that we're human. It means that we're actually doing the hard work of connection. And on
Mm,
the other side of connection is that's when we collaborate, we're more productive, we actually feel connected as well,
Right.
not just like pretend.
Yeah.
And that awkward space is for everyone. And it's a muscle to push through. And I often think of Brene Brown talks about the 8 seconds. Like it takes 8 seconds to push through the awkward.
Mhm.
And there's something about that that really calms me. I was having a text conversation with one of my kiddos who was on a trip
Yes.
as a teenager. And she was like, oh, it's just so awkward. And then I do this and then I do that. And we started talking about the 8 seconds. What could happen if you pushed through the awkward?
Mm.
And so she's like, well, then we could do this and this. And I was like, does that feel worth it? She's like, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a real conversation we have to have. And that doesn't go away
Right.
as adults. It doesn't go away. I think sometimes we shame ourselves because it's like, I feel stuck in junior high. And like, yeah, sometimes we get stuck in junior high and we have to remember, okay, here's what I do as an adult. The kind and loving thing to do is to have this conversation or to push through the awkward. The other thing that I think is so important about what you said is the feed forward. That idea of we need to have this candid conversation and the humility to say, help me see where I might be off. Like that is so key. Candid can be kind. It doesn't have to be rude. It doesn't have to be ruthless in that way. But the connection point of being transparent and humble is what brings people in so well.
Yes. One of my favorite Dave Ramsey quotes is he says, to be unclear is to be unkind.
100%. Yeah.
And I feel like if you are, believe it or not, I'm conflict averse. I'm a former police officer. I'm a hostage negotiator.
Same.
I don't want to have an argument with you. I don't which means I'll let a lot of stuff go that I probably could address. Now, bring that into the work environment. If you're on my team and I'm responsible for you, it feels loving on my part to let that go. That little transgression, that little thing, it feels like I'm being nice by letting it go. But actually what I'm doing is setting you up for failure. Because the next time you do that thing, I'm going to be more aggravated the next time than I was this time because you're doing it again in my brain. Why are you doing it again? Because I didn't correct you the first time.
Didn't even tell you.
Exactly. And what will happen is we'll avoid that conflict until eventually we'll tell our peers or our supervisors, say, listen, they're not getting it. It's time for us to find somebody who will. That's on you. Like you should get them to get it. Now, if you've had these conversations and they're not, completely different animal, right?
Totally.
And there's a difference between correcting along the way and micromanaging. I tell people
there's a mind reading aspect we're expecting of people here that is the unkind nature of that. So they're filling in their own story. We're filling in our own story. And we're actually not creating any kind of communication and shared meaning at all.
Correct. Because if I say they're not getting it, conflict bias is a real thing. My brain will label them as somebody not getting it. And I will notice 100% of the times that they're not getting it. If I course correct and look for those times that they are getting it, I'll notice those as well because I've programmed my brain to see that. It's the confirmation bias can be used in our favor as well. I tell people when somebody cuts you off in traffic, you're going to make up a story either way, right?
That's my go-to example as well, because we all do it.
Both things are potentially a lie. You could say, what a jerk, potentially a lie. Or you could say, they're late for their wife's doctor's appointment that they promised they would be there for. Both of them potentially are lies. One of them causes me less angst.
Yes.
So let's make up the lie that creates more peace for me. I will even back up and let you go so that you can get to that thing you need to get to.
Yes.
Right? What we believe, we will see a lot of times.
Yeah. I was talking about this last week, actually, about the three times where it is the kindness to have this type of conversation. And because I also think that I don't know if this is a particular woman struggle, but I hear a lot of women who struggle with it because we don't want to be the nag. We don't want to be the one who's kind of like, and there's it's probably this, it's probably just me. And so having a framework to choose, it's patterned behavior, it's causing a break in relationship, it's hurting somebody. Having that framework is also another way that I found that's helpful to feel confident about addressing it, because I too would like to moonwalk myself out of conflict. That is not my favorite place to be.
Right. The secret sauce to me, and especially as a negotiator, this was important, was rapport. If I feel like you care about me, I will be more likely to listen to what you have to say.
Absolutely.
And so that's why the first hour or two was just establishing and building rapport, asking in ways about family and about activities and what they like and because I tell people I never talked somebody into doing anything. I listened them into doing it.
Mm,
I found out what motivates them, what's a win for them, what's important, and then I would craft a solution that would allow them to check as many blocks as possible. And through that process, we develop a rapport. They trust me. They're more likely to listen to my particular solution because they know I've been listening to them.
yeah. I love that, listening people into something. That's really, really good. And I really want to keep talking. I have so many other questions and thoughts. Oh, I am so grateful for you being here today. I think you've offered us so many great examples of how to get over the awkward and push
Mhm.
through that with some empathy and connection that gets us all what we want in the end.
Right.
And as a leader, or even not even just as a leader, just as a human who is in relationship with folks, that we have that ability to push through silence when it feels like we're afraid or it feels awkward,
Right.
that the awesome is on the other side.
Yes.
And it can cause more harm if we just stay silent sometimes.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
really appreciate you being here today. Scott's book is here. So tell us how we can connect with you and stay in touch with what you're doing.
So speakingofharvey.com is my website. It has links to my socials. The issue is Scott Harvey's a winemaker in California, so I can't get my name on a lot of these things because he's more famous than I am. So
Speaking of Harvey, it's catchy. It's great.
that's where you'll find me on Instagram and things like that. TikTok, I think, is Scott Harvey 01, but I'm pretty easy to find online. Reach out to me. If you want to email me directly, it's scott@speakingofharvey.com. Love to answer any specific questions your audience has and help them in any way I can.
That's awesome. Well, we so appreciate you being here today and connecting with us. You are always a treat to talk to. I get very excited, so thank you for indulging me. And next week, I'm really excited. This is such a fun, in some ways, serendipitous flow from what I talked about last week, your conversation today. And next week, we have Nicole Trick-Steinbeck, and she's talking about being brave and being a brave leader and how that comes out in your communication. So I'm so grateful for you today. And people, please connect with Scott. He's fantastic, just such a lovely and wise human. So thank you again for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, everybody. See you next week, live at 1 p.m. on Monday. So let me put my coach hat on for just a sec. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them. Connect with us to keep this conversation going. As always, I'm Jen Whitmer. Thank you for listening to Joyosity. I don't take for granted that your earballs have a lot of information coming at you. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It really helps more people join us in creating positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.